Hello and welcome to the trade setup. In this video we are looking at silver. It is time for another update, and of course we will also be taking a look at gold a bit later in this video, but let's start with what we had on silver in the previous video. So in the case of this structure, we had a potentially complete pattern. We had 5 waves down, so we really didn't want to see any further extensions. Not only that, but we also had an initial 5 move to the upside, so we wanted to see this white area of support that extended down to $78.6 hold, because there was a strong chance that if we were to break this area of support, from which we even got a bounce, the last level of support has offered us this bounce, but if we were to break this last area of support, there was a good chance we would have to extend within a full 5-wave pattern to even lower prices, and this actually seems to have played out quite strongly, quite aggressively, where we cannot even reliably track this larger white area of support any longer. In fact, we seem to be consolidating below it before potentially extending even lower. In such a case, I have to consider it less likely that either this yellow or green interpretation would have rather fewer chances of playing out, and these scenarios will no longer be a focus for me. I am open to reopening them if we manage to break internal levels of resistance, but as it stands right now, I have to focus on lower prices, and I will not even track this internal white area of support. Then secondly, as a foreshadow here, in the case of this chart, especially if we get a reset within this wave 4, which seems most likely at this point, we might actually need to consider a different pattern altogether, because the proportions of what we would then have in place would start severely exceeding what we would typically expect of a wave 4, where we had only this tiny correction within a wave 2. I will likely have to consider that this would have been actually something more bullish long term. I would have to potentially consider that this chart is actually building an impulse where I would have something like a double 1 2 1 2, and then this would have been a wave 3 to the upside complete. I would then need to consider that we've had an extended wave 5 within the large wave 3, and I would have to look for a large degree wave 4 correction that would be a better match for the correction in a wave 2 within this structure. And I believe we can actually switch to this scenario today. I have been considering it previously, but it wasn't a main focus for me, because this as an internal wave 4 correction had done enough, and it would have been too short to match the expectations of this larger structure. In this scenario, I consider the wave 1 had topped here. This would have been my wave 2, and more or less fortunately, the area of support I would track for such a large degree wave 4 would remain pretty much unchanged, because I would need to adjust to the current bottom of the wave 2, the beginning of the wave 3, but I would only be able to look at the 50% retracement, which sits at $58, compared to the 61.8% retracement, which was sitting at $57.65. So, from a larger time frame perspective, this remains pretty much unchanged. We aren't looking at a different expectation from the point of view of the support zone, but this would simply be a better match in terms of proportions, especially once again as I expect to get this extension within wave 4, right? Today I expect that we actually push below $61, the previous low we had within this as a wave 4, as within the structure I am tracking internally, which will become our focus immediately, we do not have a complete pattern. I would in fact be looking to even extend directly lower within this internal wave 3. This count has already been in place in the previous video. We do see, however, a pretty extended version of it, as I am able to track here a double 1 2 setup. This would have been my wave 3. I do have a wave 4 in place and a wave 5, But that means I actually need another wave 4 and another wave 5 to complete this as a wave 3 to the downside. Well, this is actually a bit of an issue, and I will tell you honestly, based on the count within this structure, there is a good chance the white area of support will not end up holding. I would have a wave 1 down here, a wave 2 up here, wave 3 down, wave 4 up, and a wave 5, only to complete this as an internal wave 3. Well, in this interpretation, I would need to watch out for the levels of resistance for a potential wave 4 that would be currently in formation, that being my primary expectation, and I would have to watch the levels between $65.92 all the way up to $68.74, where already we notice that we have pushed into the first level of resistance. Based on this structure, based on the fact that I actually see only 3 waves to the upside, technically a top could be in within this wave 4. Technically, the wave 5 could already be in formation. Now, there is a bit of headroom we can consider in the case of this correction itself. We do have a slightly large wave 2, so primarily, especially if I consider this to have been the wave 3 bottom, I would prefer to actually form an extension within the wave 4 correction, right? We might need to see one more high, we could track an internal A, B, C pattern, and we could be looking even at internal levels of support that would allow us to expect continuation to higher prices within one more high before having a more substantial top within the red wave 4. This is not the problem, however. But what the issue really is here is that if we are to build such a structure within this movement to the downside, we might actually need to reach the last level of support before we even end this structure. If this isn't the bottom, and we would have certain levels of resistance we would need to break to indicate that it is, but if this isn't the bottom, well, this entire larger scenario would start falling apart. This larger expectation would need to shift to something potentially quite bearish actually, where it's not necessarily that we will see incredible lows, but it might take a while before we actually see new all-time highs again. Now, before we switch to the gold chart, I do want to highlight one more thing. I do still prefer to be in the formation of a more substantial bottom in the case of silver. Within this wave 4 correction, we actually see a pretty strong sell-off at the moment within this development. We have actually been trending down for, what is it, like 4 weeks at this point. But if we look at the volume, we see a substantial decrease. Well, this is actually a pretty bullish signal. It is not enough by any means to provide a confirmation that we are forming a bottom. I would want to see some green candles for a change, and I would want to see some volume with those green candles to confirm accumulation by larger institutions. Yeah, the same way we have actually seen in these spikes as we have been increasing higher and higher across this movement to the upside. I do want to see some signs of that happening, but as it stands right now, I believe most people who want to sell will be selling in this movement to the downside. That is to a fault the retail pattern, selling at the worst possible time before actually seeing the reversal. And again, I do not know and I do not try to predict that we will bottom here within this white area of support. The structure does allow for significantly lower prices, and as it stands right now, I do prefer even to see lower prices in the case of the silver chart. With all that said, we have the main levels of resistance we want to watch out for. This is not a prediction that we will see continuation to lower prices from this red area of resistance. It is more likely than not, but I want to see one of these areas of resistance that I will be tracking in the case of this decline broken for a stronger indication that a less bearish pattern will be following through. Moving on to the gold chart. Now, I actually have some technical difficulties in the case of the gold chart. I did open it and the data wouldn't show up, and now I have most of my drawings removed. Not sure exactly why, but I will refresh your memory. I've been tracking this idea of a potential 1-2 setup. I was strongly preferring for a bottom to be in, but even in the case of the gold chart, this is no longer a likely outcome. We see a sustained break below the 50% retracement, and we have been looking for this structure to potentially still be extending directly higher within this idea of an impulse, where the wave 3 would have just formed a more substantial top. Like on the silver chart, at this point I have to consider that a more substantial top would be in within a larger degree wave 3. I would have to consider that I would be looking at a quite extended wave 5 within this as a larger wave 3 to the upside. Now, this isn't going to break our expectations, the same as on the silver chart. I would still expect higher prices, but yes, we have to readjust our expectations. We have to be looking for a complete reset within this wave 4, as the movement to the downside doesn't seem complete by any means, and even here we are looking at actually some issues with the proportions we see within this overall movement to the downside. It is extending significantly, isn't it? It is getting out of hand to the point that I might actually even need to consider that this as a wave 3 would have formed a more substantial top. I would actually still like to give this one a chance, discount where, yes, only this wave 3 would have formed a more substantial top, and get a better idea of what we are developing within the smaller time frame before making any further judgments in the case of this structure. So, in the smaller time frame, I'm once again looking at a potentially quite bearish structure. I could see this working out even as an impulse where this would have been a double 1-2 setup, and now I would have to be developing the wave 3 to the downside. Even in the case of the wave 3, which is what we will be focusing on, I could expect significant lower prices to continue as the pattern remains currently incomplete. And what would I like to see? Once again, it is a break of the levels of resistance I would have to consider for such an interpretation. And just a small hint, even this wave 3 could actually get another 4-5 pattern, as within this smaller time frame I can actually identify here a double 1-2 setup instead of just a singular one. But primarily I will be tracking the main area of resistance as being for this idea of a 1, 2, 3, 4 and a 5. In this scenario, I would have to see a break above the 50% retracement standing at $4,331 before having the strong indication that no, this idea of an impulse will not be following through. We will manage to see a stronger reversal. We will manage to see a less bearish outcome than what we currently have seemingly in play in the case of this structure. Beyond that, we also see significantly more selling pressure in at least these last few hours in the case of the gold chart, where we haven't even managed to start our larger wave 4 correction. I do want to highlight though, while it is possible to extend directly lower within this movement to the downside, I actually believe a structure could be complete. If I were to zoom in, I believe we could identify a complete 5-wave pattern here, although even this actually has a chance of extending even further. But for now, we will actually stop here. We have the levels of resistance we want to see broken. We do know that if we see direct extensions to lower prices within this wave 3 without forming the larger wave 4 correction, which we expect to be a 3-wave pattern, we have to also adjust the levels of resistance we would track for this idea of a large wave 4, dragging them lower along with the low in the wave 3. These are the levels, this is the trade setup. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and if you enjoyed the content and want to support it directly, check out the channel membership, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.